halfway through that hunger strike, the British government had reactivated a back channel. There was talk that they were prepared to introduce a progressive, liberal regime which would deal with all of the concerns of the prisoners. And we on the outside asked for proof of that.
What happened was that the changeover of documents, and there's this whole scenario whereby the priest who was visiting the prisoners on hunger strike and then dealing with Bobby Sands as the OC was given documents at an airport, and when he arrived at the prison hospital, Sean McKenna had been in a critical condition and was to be shifted to Musgrave Park Hospital, and I think he was lapsing into a coma.
It was like this surreal game of poker where the cards were the lives of the people in that prison, and everybody was holding them. The government, the Irish government was holding them, British government was holding them, the prisoners were holding them themselves. And right in the middle, Sean McKenna's dying. It's a question of who folded first.
What transpired was there was almost a position that was acceptable, that there was documents produced that, depending on the manner in which you read it and depending on what way it was delivered by the British, that there was a way out of the dilemma for everybody concerned. It was decided on the strength of what was contained, that rather than allow him to die for something that was en route, just needing agreed, that the hunger strike was terminated.
Convinced that a deal was on its way from London, the hunger strikers believed they had not only saved the life of Sean McKenna, but also dealt a serious body blow to Margaret Thatcher and the British government.
There was a whole air of, well, relief that no one had died on it, concern about Sean when you had been taken to outside hospital, hope that he was okay, and I suppose a whole sense of expectation.
The hunger strike was called off at, if I remember, 4:30 on, I think it might have been the 30th December the 18th, and it was broadcast on downtown radio. And Sean McKenna's life was saved, and therefore, of course, our own lives were saved. And then the negotiations really got underway as to how this could be implemented.
I was in with Bobby Sands, the OC of the protesting political prisoners, and he was extremely buoyant this morning and very, very happy about the outcome.
But the prisoners' euphoria was not to last. When a priest, Father Brendan Maher, delivered the British government's document, one that they believed would satisfy their demand for political status, they discovered that it was vague and open to interpretation.
The British government thought that this was an opportunity to put more pressure on the prisoners, that this was an opportunity to grind the prisoners down, and then they started to deny that they were involved in a deal with Republicans.
No, I don't think there were any decisions taken while the hunger strike was on, but certainly there was a concession after it was on, that people could wear civilian-type clothing, but provided they obeyed the prison rules.
When that strike ended, there was much recrimination about what had been promised or hadn't been promised. What the NIO, the Northern Ireland office, had offered was something which did meet some of the demands of the prisoners, but by no means all of them. There was some movement on clothing, but not to the freedom of wearing your own clothes that Republicans wanted. There were aspects of the deal that didn't suit Republicans. And once the strike had ended, it's clear that the authorities felt that there was perhaps less imminence in implementing the sort of things that the Republicans wanted because the strike had been beaten. Republicans claimed that they had been promised the 5 demands had been met and the British had now reneged. It's unclear whether that's the case. So it was a murky period, but because Republicans were unsatisfied with the way that things ended and the treatment they received afterwards, they didn't win their 5 demands after the first strike, they fairly quickly decided that a second strike was going to begin and that this one would be, in a sense, an even more resolute conflict.
Convinced that they had been tricked by the British government, the prisoners began their second hunger strike just 3 months after ending the first one. This strike was to be led by IRA man Bobby Sands. And this time, it was to be a hunger strike to the death.
Our prisoners have taken their own lives deliberately. I do not know of any religious leader or politician who is urging me to give political status. Not one. Every single one of them knows that to do so will be tantamount to giving some people a license to murder innocent men, women and children.
By the spring of 1981, Republicans in the Maze prison had been on protest for 5 years. But still the British government refused to meet their demand to be treated not as criminals, but as political prisoners. Now, to increase pressure on Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the prisoners prepared to go on hunger strike for a second time.
There was a recognition prior to the first hunger strike that hunger strike was the only action that was going to bring this to conclusion, and it was felt that a second hunger strike should be embarked upon. And when this was broached with the leadership, I'd say they almost had apoplexy.
We were against the strike. I personally was against the strike. When I was against the strike because I thought that people were going to die. And also to be quite sort of tactical about it, because we couldn't afford another huge prison crisis, which then ended the same way as the first one.
The IRA leadership were generally speaking against the hunger strike, but Thatcher had set her face against a deal with the prisoners, and so the prisoners knew then the die was cast, I suppose, and they set about organising the second hunger strike.
Everybody was unhappy that we were going into it again. But I mean, that was Ireland, wasn't it? That was the problem in Northern Ireland. It was a problem of terrorism. You got the impression that they would try any tactic, and they came again.
This time, the hunger strike was to be led by Bobby Sands, and he was determined that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated.
In the first hunger strike, all 7 prisoners had gone on hunger strike together. Bobby Sands then decided a different strategy for the second hunger strike. First of all, they wanted, he was going to go out on hunger strike on his own 2 weeks in front of everyone else, so as that whenever he was at a critical period, the next hunger striker wouldn't have been as critical or as vulnerable. And the second thing that he demanded is guarantors of a settlement. Now, myself and Jerry Adams were named as external spokespersons, and we were regularly cited during that period as those who Bobby wanted, and then subsequently the other hunger strikers wanted to be present to ensure that the deceit that was involved in the first hunger strike could not be repeated.
While preparations for the protest gathered momentum, to many people outside the prison, the IRA hunger strikers deserved neither support nor sympathy.